Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your 10-minute weekly fix of ancient warfare to get away from whatever's happening in your everyday life. Or if you're like me, who's an ancient historian, it's pretty much just doubling down. Anyway, you can, of course, ask us a question, send us a postcard, send us an email, ask a question on the comment section on a video or a podcast. You can back us on Patreon, one of 3 different levels. Euchale has another question today. I recently watched a video by Farya Faraji, I hope I say that right, on just how inaccurate a lot of modern interpretations of ancient music is. One of his pet peeves is the use of Armenian Duduks for anything vaguely Arabic. 2 questions. I hope this is okay. Do you have a pet peeve that every movie gets wrong about ancient warfare? Do I? And mine are braces. Yes, braces. Braces are great. Have you ever researched anything in regards to ancient music in your area of expertise? Funnily enough, yes. And I think I made a comment in a previous video about how that question didn't cover off on my love of opera. More of that anon. So this will be a 2-parter. The first part will be the ancient history part and the ancient warfare part. The second part will veer, still ancient history, into music. So I will have sucked you in by talking about ancient warfare in the first half, and then you'll be stuck hearing me talk about opera in the second half. Now, so coming back to the first part of your question, Euchale, about pet peeves. My pet peeve is probably the domination of ancient warfare on film with flaming weapons, whether it be arrows or balls from, catapults and ballistae that are flaming, especially when either it's a daytime battle against infantry. There's no need to flame anything. It just looks visually interesting. And I'm not denying that it doesn't look cool. I mean, the opening battle of the Gladiator from 2000, amazing, looks fantastic, but that wouldn't have happened. There would be no need to burn that stuff. And the other thing, of course, is that often they're being used against stone buildings. And you're like, well, what's that going to light? Especially when they're not actually going into said stone walls, just impacting to look cool. So that's probably the biggest pet peeve I have. I agree with you. Braces are an amazing invention in ancient history, medieval history, fantasy. When you look at the historical record and the historical visual record, very few warriors, especially non-archers, absolutely archers, do have some kind of bracer. Doesn't look anything like the braces you get in film. But none of the other warriors tend to have forearm protection. A little bit in the early bronze hoplite armor, where the proto hoplite has a forearm protector, and you could argue that Roman legionaries with the manica on their arm in the Trajan station wars have forearm protection, but it's a whole band. So that bracer thing is just why? That's just weird because it looks cool. It's like, who decided it looked cool when it is so ahistorical? So that's probably my pet peeve is definitely the flaming weapons. Also, I don't like the fact that no matter what ancient movie you watch with warfare involved, every formation devolves into one-on-one combat that just becomes tacticless. That is another pet peeve of mine. Even Spartacus, which the opening scenes of the Spartacus, the big battle at the end of Spartacus, where you've got this glorious maneuvering of a Roman legion in a quincunx, and it's like, that's great. And then you have the massed gladiator army charge, and then eventually it's just all one-on-one combat. There's no shield walls anywhere. There's no cohesion of a unit. Perhaps, interestingly, the best film depiction of a unit staying as a unit is 1936's Scipio Africanus, the Italian film. Despite the fact that it's a fascist propaganda movie in many ways, actually has a very good use of unit cohesion. It also peculiarly has Pila being thrown, which obviously in a lot of later movies for safety reasons, they just advance into battle with these throwing javelins that never get thrown anywhere because that's going to be too dangerous. And obviously, like again, Gladiator shows marching forward with a throwing spear, not throwing it. So that's always a problem too. Obviously, there are more pet peeves come to my mind. There are issues with uniforms in many different films where they get the helmet wrong and they get the uniform wrong, which is annoying because it would have only taken a question to a historian to get it right. But I can sort of let those pass. I did make the mistake once of leaning over to my wife and saying that the uniforms were wrong in an opera performance of Julius Caesar. I got glared at, so I stopped doing that. Now, that's a nice segue into opera. You talk about, in your second half of your question, about ancient music. Now, I've done some research into ancient music. Well, not ancient music as such, but, for instance, the opera versions of Nero, the Emperor Nero. And the funny thing about that is that all of the ancient sources talk about Nero being a bad singer. And so I started to look at some of the vocabulary around describing him as a bad singer. And it says he has a deep voice, or a dark voice, not a bad voice necessarily. And so it's an interesting twist that most modern views of him, if you look at Quo Vadis and Peter Ustinov and things like that, they make him into a terrible singer. But there's nothing actually in the sources that say he's bad. The shame is that it's an emperor singing, not that he's a bad singer or a bad lyre player. It's just that it's him doing it, and how shameful it is that an emperor or a ruler would be stooping so low to perform in such a way. So that's interesting. And when you look at the opera versions of Nero, and he's been a figure in lots of operas from the 17th century onwards, he's also not necessarily a bad singer. Or when he's described as a bad singer, he still has to be sung by an operatic tenor who isn't singing badly. It's a very peculiar mix. I also did some research on the operatic depictions of Attila the Hun, which is fascinating all the way through 17th and 18th century opera. Verdi's opera of Attila is probably the most famous, which I have actually sung way back in 2004. And then, of course, all the way into musicals and some even comedic musicals of Attila. So, again, like many things, it's about accessing the topic. And even though they may choose an instrument or a way of playing a particular kind of instrument or a sound world that isn't necessarily cutting edge in terms of our knowledge on ancient music, it's that thing that most people will recognize it. It's like Roman legionaries. They all have segmented armor in film, regardless of whether you're talking about Romulus and Remus, all the way through to, the very late King Arthur movie from 2004. So they're always wearing the same kind of armor because that's what we recognize as a Roman legionary. And in order to show a more accurate Roman legionary, you're going to need to have them watching a documentary first about the correct type of armor or the correct type of sword or the correct type of helmet. And so in terms of ancient music, that's something that, is in the same sort of realm, that in order to have correct ancient music, you're going to need a documentary to explain what that is or what we think that is before you then play that kind of correct ancient music in your film. And so in many ways, that kind of idea is tricky because you're always going to come up against an access point where most people in your audience have a certain, or think they have a certain amount of knowledge. And so if you play against that, if you show a Roman in chainmail armor, which we know is far more common for far longer than segmented armor, people are going to say, but that's not a Roman legionary. What sort of soldier is that? Similarly, the rectangular curved scooter, that's only for about 150, 200 years maybe. And the oval shield and then the round shield is a far more ubiquitous Roman shield, but that's not what we think about when we think about Roman shields. Similarly with gladii versus the spathii, the gladius is really only 150, 200 years, and then they get longer and longer. So all of those things are problematic because what people think they know and what people who study that kind of material know are different. And you can't convince the people who think they know what Romans look like that they're wrong. You can't do that when you're doing a film. So it's always going to come back to a particular kind of visual and sound world for the music, which fits with what people think was going on. I hope that answers your question. And join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.